Hi, this is Marcel Seals with the Technology Integration Team. Today I'm going to show you how to create, manipulate, and share pivot tables using Google Sheets. We'll begin by creating a new Google Sheet. We'll go ahead and do the first thing, which is give our spreadsheet a title. That way we won't have any confusion after we complete our project. We'll go ahead and call this Pivot Table. Excellent. Now we have ourselves a blank spreadsheet. If we look here at the bottom, we'll see that we have a title for this page or this sheet. The reason that it's called a sheet is because it's just one sheet in a complete workbook. A sheet is like a page. We're going to go ahead and rename this too. You can go ahead and right click on that, go to rename, and we'll call this home. The way that we manage our files is by making sure that we use naming conventions that make sense to us. Now we have an empty spreadsheet prepared for any type of work we want to do. So what we want to do is create a pivot table. In order to create a pivot table, we first must create a regular table. I'm going to create a table by inserting a sample data set. Now, this sample data set has a list of students who are identified by their gender, by their grade, their date of birth, their names, and their class rankings. Now what we have here is a data set. In Excel, this would not be a table. We could make it an official range by highlighting the entire set of data, clicking on Data, and go to Named Ranges. And we can give this a name. We'll call it Range 1. Done. All right. Now, the purpose of naming a range is because we might not want to select the entire data set. This could include all sorts of data on students, many columns. Perhaps we only want to know the student rank, their name, and their date of birth. If I only highlight those things and I go to Data and give this range a name, we'll call this Range 2. All right. So we can slice this up any way we want to and create what in Google Sheets would be called a table. In Excel, we wouldn't be able to stop right there. We would have to insert table to officially turn this into a table. That's a step we don't have to worry about in Google Sheets. Google Sheets assumes that any connected range of data is a table, and it treats it like that. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these two ranges because we're going to use the entire data set. Now, other things that we can do with this data set is we can make it more readable, for example, by formatting it and alternating the colors. There. Now it looks a little bit more like a traditional table. I'll go ahead and undo that. Now, if we want to insert a chart, what we do is we click anywhere inside of this data set and we click Insert Chart. And notice, even though I did not highlight all of the data is represented in this chart. Now this chart doesn't have a lot of details in it. In order for us to add details to this chart, we would have to go to Edit Chart, and we can select the chart type any number of ways that makes sense with our data set. All right, we can choose labels. We can even switch the rows and columns. All right. Now here it says use column A as headers. We don't want to use column A as headers because column A represents only this. We want to use row 2 as headers. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close that. Matter of fact, let's do that again. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create ourselves a chart using this set of data. So I'm going to go ahead and click anywhere inside of this data set, and I'm going to click Insert Chart. Boom. All right. Even though I did not highlight all of the data, notice that our chart includes all of the data. Now, it starts us off with a very basic chart that we can refine by using the chart editor over here. Now, one thing we want to do, we want to go ahead and look at whether the chart we have makes sense with our data set. All right, so we can arrange this in different ways. Another thing we want to do is we want to come up with our headers. Now this says use row 2 as headers, and that's exactly what we want. If we were to use column A as headers, then that would mean that we're using student rank as the header, which wouldn't make sense for our chart. So I'm going to go back to the chart editor. We're going to use row 2 as headers. Now, notice that I don't have the students' names under here. We're going to use a pivot table, which will automatically include things like that. Now, I'm going to close this chart editor. We have ourselves a chart, and we can customize this chart, but there's a faster and more convenient and useful way for us to make charts using a pivot table. A pivot table will combine all of the information that we have in this data set and will allow us to look at the data in a variety of ways. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this chart because we're going to make a better chart. The way that we turn this set of data into a pivot table is by clicking anywhere inside of the data set, clicking on data up here, and clicking on pivot table. Now it asks us if we want to include the pivot table on the existing sheet or this existing page, or if we want to do it on a new sheet. Best practices are to go ahead and create a separate sheet for your pivot table. So we're going to go ahead and do a new sheet, and we're going to create that. And here we are. We are at a new sheet called Pivot Table 1. It's automatically named that, but we can rename it if we would choose to. Now, notice that our workspace looks a little different. We don't have the lines, and we don't have any information up here. All of the information for our pivot table is stored on this side, and it brings whatever information we have from the data set on our home page over here into the pivot table editor. Now, if I were to go here and delete some rows or add some rows or change any information, it would be automatically updated over here in our pivot table editor. There is a live link between this pivot table and the data set on our home page. So any changes we make will be reflected automatically in the pivot table. Now, what we're going to do with our data set is we are going to begin to add information. Now, the way a pivot table works is that we build it. Notice on our home page, when we wanted to make a chart, we would start off using all the information, and then we would have to work backwards to delete information from our charts that we made. Here it's the opposite. we're going to make ourselves a table by selecting specific data from our data set. So now we can begin to build our pivot table. We'll begin by adding some information. We're going to add a row by student rank. Next, we're going to add a row of the students' first names. Notice that we have extra rows in between that say totals. That's because by default it shows totals, but for data such as student rank, we won't be actually calculating with those numbers. So we don't need totals. We're going to uncheck show totals here, and we're going to uncheck show totals there for the first name. Now we have our data set, student ranking by first name. To insert a chart, we're going to go ahead and insert chart, and here we go. We have a chart in ascending order with the students' names labeled. Now, perhaps we don't want all of the students labeled. Perhaps we only want some of them. Well, we have all of the data from our home sheet over here on the pivot table editor. So even though it's not showing, it knows the information. So we can go down here to filters, and we can add ourselves a filter. Let us say we want to filter this information by gender. Also, we might want to filter this by year. Year being the grade that the students are in. If we look over here at our data set and also at our chart, we'll see that adding these two filters has not changed a thing. These are just options for us to filter. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a filter so it only shows the female students. I'm going to click on gender. I'm going to deselect male and click OK, and watch what happens to our data set and also our chart. Now the data set only shows the female students, and so does our chart. This doesn't mean that we've done anything to actually change our data set. We can change our filter to show both again, and it brings us back to where we were before. We can also filter by year. So if we only want to show the 7th grade students, I'll deselect 8th and 9th grade, click OK. There we go. Now let's combine these filters and show only the 7th grade students who are male. We're going to deselect female, click OK, and there we go. Now we have a chart and a data set that shows only the 7th grade students who are male in order of class ranking. That's pretty good, especially considering that we did not have to go through a whole bunch of steps on our original data sheet. Now, here's what we're going to do. When we determine a selection, for example this, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to clear all these filters to show everyone, and we're going to do more than just look at different data. We're going to actually create some charts to share, for example, during a presentation or as part of a report. So what we're going to do is this. I'm going to first filter this by gender and grade level. So we're going to start off with the females. I'm going to deselect male so it only shows the female students, and I'm going to only choose the 7th grade. So get rid of 8th and 9th. Okay. So these are the 7th grade female students in order. Why would we want to do that? Well, perhaps there's some sort of special program that is only for females and they need to know their class rankings. So we might want to do that. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to duplicate this onto another sheet or page, and we're going to rename it. We're going to name this 7th female. Enter. And now we're going to go back to our pivot table. We're now going to change our filters and do the 7th grade males. All right. Now that we have a different chart, we're going to duplicate this page, and we're going to name this 7th male. And then we'll go back to our original pivot table. Now notice, in our whole book of sheets, we have page 1, which is our home page, which has the original data set. Page 2, which is our working pivot table. Page 3, which has the information for the 7th grade male students in class ranking order. And our 4th page, which has the 7th grade female students in ranking order. We could go on and on and on and create many, many pages. The key is every time we do a selection, so let's say we want to go ahead and show both the male and female in ranking order for 8th grade, we'll select 8th and deselect 7th and click OK. There we go. Now we have all students in 8th grade. Just like before, I'll duplicate this. I'll name it simply 8th grade. All right, and go back to our original pivot table so we can continue to work and generate more charts. If we want to keep this in some sort of order, I can slide my 8th grade behind the 7th grade, and so on and so forth, whichever way makes sense to you. So notice that every time we re-aggregate the data and therefore change the chart, we want to save that chart by duplicating it and giving it its own sheet. Here's why we want to do that. We want to share this information, perhaps in a slideshow. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my drive, and I am going to create a slideshow by clicking Google Slides. All right, just like with our spreadsheet, we want to begin by naming this. So we're going to name this Pivot Table Presentation. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and skip that title slide. We can decorate that later. Right now, we just want to get some information up here. So the first thing I want to do is show 7th grade girls, females. All right. I can go ahead and format that header by centering it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this box because we're going to insert a chart here. I'm going to insert, go down until I see a chart, and because this is all within my Google Drive, I'm going to be able to connect to my sheets. So I'm going to go to Sheets, and here I see my pivot table sheet. I'm going to select that. And now it gives me all of the charts that I have. Now, I see that I need to go back and do something. All of my charts have the same name. So not only do I need to rename the pages to help me keep track, but I also need to rename these charts. No problem. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going back to my pivot table. So we're going to rename each one of these charts so that we can keep things organized. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this chart. Notice that there are 3 dots come up, right? We are going to go to our chart editor. We're going to customize, and we are going to go to chart, axis, and titles. Here we have the title, student rank versus first name. We're going to need to change that to 7th male. Now, I could come up with something more descriptive. However, I don't want to have different names. I want to keep all of the names identical to what I named the sheet because it's easier to organize that way, but it's not necessary. Now I'm going to rename the 7th grade female. I'm going to click in my chart, click the 3 dots, edit chart, customize, chart axis in titles, and find title text. We're going to name this the same thing as our sheet name is, which is 7th female. Done. And you can see the changes up here. Finally, we'll go to our 8th grade. There's an editor here, but it's the pivot table editor. We're going to close that. And we're going to click on the chart, our 3 dots, edit chart, customize, chart and axis titles, and rename this to 8th grade. Done. And we see it's reflected here. So let us go back to our slideshow. We are going to insert a chart. Insert, chart from sheets, our pivot table chart, select. And now we have our basic pivot table chart, which I haven't renamed yet, and we'll start off with 7th female. We'll go ahead, import that, and we can resize it however we want. We might want to make it small so that we can add a text box here on the side, or we might want to keep it large and centered. All right, so let's go ahead and add ourselves another page. This time our slide title will be 7th grade males. We'll click our 3 dots and center this. We'll get rid of this text box because we don't need it. We're going to insert ourselves a chart using the same process from sheets. We'll select that. Now we'll do 7th grade male, import it, and then we'll center it, make it a little bit larger. Perfect. Finally, we are going to add ourselves a new slide. We'll name this 8th grade. Click our 3 dots on top, center this, get rid of our text box, and we'll insert our final chart for the day from sheets. And we see our 8th grade. Now, this time I'm going to point something out to you. As I select 8th grade, before I hit import, notice that this is checked, link to spreadsheet. I can leave it checked or I can uncheck it. If I uncheck it, it will stay as is, even if I change my source data on the spreadsheet. If I leave it checked, then as I change or update my source data on my spreadsheet, those changes will be automatically reflected here in my slideshow. So I'm going to leave that checked. Here, and there we go. So we have ourselves all of these different charts in our presentation that are linked to our original data source. So as we change the original data source, the information that is here will also change in real time, behind the scenes in Google Drive. Then we could go up here and we could add a title. We could change the themes. we can do whatever we want from that point. And there you have it. You can now create, manipulate, and share your own pivot tables using Google Sheets.